In this week's video, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to be planting in the garden this year. Hi, I'm Robin. Welcome to Robin's Container Garden. So this week, I decided that I was going to start planting things that I could plant directly outside. So the first thing that I'm going to be planting is some spring onions. Now these are winter hardy spring onions, so they should actually come up okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow some soil from one of my potato bags, because this soil is not going to be used for potatoes this year. So I'm just going to borrow some soil from one of these containers and put in here to cover up the spring onions. Not too much, and the soil's wet. We've had some good rain, so I'm not going to bother putting any water in here because it's already wet. When I was getting ready to do this, I thought it would be a good idea to talk to you about the seeds that I'm going to be planting in the garden this year. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, I've already told you all of my plans for 2023. What I want to do now is talk to you about the seeds that I'm going to be planting outside. So let's open up the seed box and see what's inside. I don't plan on talking to you much about the stuff that I've got planted in the ground. For instance, I'm going to have a wildflower garden. There's going to be cucumbers, hopefully, a butternut squash that's going to be planted around the front. And in the place where I had the beans last year, I'm going to be planting corn and onions. I might show you those, but I'm not going to go into a whole lot about them because they're not in containers. Now, the one thing that I will be talking about that will be in ground, and there's a reason for this, is my borlotti beans. Now, I saved some seeds from last year, and they are by far one of our favorite beans to eat. So they are climbing French beans, and what I'm going to do this year is I'm going to be planting them in ground, but by the pumpkin arch. And where I had the cucumbers planted last year in containers, I'm going to be planting my dwarf French purple queen beans. Now those, again, are some of our favorite beans to eat. I've never been a green bean person until I tried these purple queens. Now they're purple when you pick them, but when you cook them, they turn a really dark green, but they have got the best flavor ever. Also, one of my viewers sent me some kidney bean seeds. Now this is something that I've wanted to try, but I never have done it. This is going to be a new crop for me this year. These are dried beans that she saved from supermarket, and so I don't know if they're climbing, I don't know if they're dwarf, so I'm going to have to put some thought into exactly where they're going to be planted, but they will be over with the rest of the beans on the arch. Now there's some kind of caveats to planting kidney beans, but we'll get around to that when it's time to talk about the beans. So that's the beans that I'm going to be growing this year. Now around the north side of the house, we had courgettes growing last year, and we had some beautiful courgettes. They were absolutely delicious, and they just put fruit on one right after the other. Now we had a striped courgette, and we had a green courgette, a solid green one that was called Ambassador. The striped one is the Striato d'Italia, and we actually preferred that one. It actually also did better. It performed better than the Ambassador, so that's what we're going to grow this year. We are probably going to have more plants than we had last year, but I'm shaving down the varieties a little bit. We've been testing a few things out to see which is our favorite, and we're just going to grow more of those this year. I'm definitely only going to grow 2 courgette plants because it's just the 2 of us in the house. But if they go well, we may try another one next year for another kind of experiment that I'm wanting to try. I'm already lining the experiments up for next year. Get me. But we will have 2 of the courgette Striato d'Italias around the north side of the house. They performed really well around there, and that is one of the things that we're going to have around there. As far as root plants go, you know we're growing potatoes, and I have first earlies, second earlies, and main crops to grow this year, and I'll be planting my first lot of potatoes. I think next week is when I've got them planned, which reminds me we need to get that compost bin dug out. Another one of the root veg that we're going to be growing this year is beetroot. What we did last year is I started the seeds in the greenhouse, the little poly greenhouse, and let them get established before I put them in the garden. And once they got to a certain height, put them out into the container out back on the west side of the house. And then I planted some new seeds in there. Now, one of the things that I didn't do very well was thin the seeds, and I'm planning on doing better this year with that. I planted beetroot bolt hardy last year, and I also planted beetroot bull's blood. We didn't get a lot of big bulbs, but again, it was the problem with that was that I didn't thin the seedlings out. So what I plan on doing this year is doing another test. I'm going to do a container of bolt hardy and a container of the bull's blood. Now, the bull's blood had bigger leaves, and we put those in the salads all the time. They were very good for that. The bolt hardy ones were okay, but the bull's blood ones I felt like had a better flavor, and they were much bigger, so they went further. I am going to make a little bit of a change this year on where I'm growing my greens. Last year, I grew them all around the west side of the house. I'm planning on growing them around the north side of the house this year. So all of my lettuce, my kale, my pak choi, everything that's green is going to be grown around the north side of the house for a couple of reasons. One reason is because I want to make room enough for my peppers and tomatoes. But another reason is that I think that they will be better there because there's a little bit of shade, where on the west side of the house it's mostly sun and it's very, very warm. This year I'm going to be growing some, I'm going to be growing some dwarf green curled kale. Now, I didn't grow curled kale last year. I just grew the flat leaf kale, and it was good. But one of the things that I want to do this year is I want to freeze as much as possible, and I think this is a better freezing thing. So I'll be planting the curled kale. I am going to also plant some black Tuscan kale. I haven't planted that before. I mean, I have planted it. I've got it in my little milk cartons, but it's not up completely yet. But I will be planting some more of the black Tuscan kale because I think that that will be a really interesting looking plant. It'll make the salads look really nice, and it's a good freezer. Pak choi, definitely thanks to Eli over in the garden with Eli and Kate. I got to try some pak choi back in October over at their house when I went for a visit. So I've got some of these pak choys, the red and the white stemmed, planted out in the milk cartons at the moment, and they're getting on really well. So we're definitely going to plant some succession planting in a couple of containers and see how we get on with those. And I know that I'm going to have to be very selective in thinning on these because they need a little bit of room. So I'm just going to have to make myself do it this year. More of the greens that I'm going to be growing this year. Lettuce, not a good freezer, but we did eat tons of salad last year. So I'm planning on growing more lettuce, and we'll be doing the same this year. I will, however, not plant all the lettuce at one time. I'll plant half, and then a couple weeks later I'll plant some more, and then we'll hopefully not have like all the lettuce ready at one time. I'm also going to be planting some more spinach. We just love spinach, and that is a good one to freeze. So you can freeze it after you've blanched it. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into this to see if you can freeze it for fresh leaf. So I'm going to look into that, and I'll let you know. Another thing that I'll be growing this year again is chard. And that's another one that I plan on freezing. I'm really hoping that we can work out to have as much of the garden frozen as possible so we can eat it throughout the winter. In addition to the courgettes, the squashes that I'm going to be planting this year are going to be some butternut squash that I saved from the supermarket. And that's the seeds here. I've done a germination test, and they do germinate. I'm also going to be trying the pumpkins again. I'm going to try the Jack Be Littles and the Baby Boos, but they're going to be going into the ground, so there's not going to be a lot of talk about them. I'm going to be trying to grow the aubergines again this year. Now, they actually, leaf-wise, they grew like crazy last year. We did have some terrible winds that just really, I think they really got stunted from the winds that we had last summer. So I'm going to be very careful with where I place the aubergines this year, but I'm planting 2, and I've already started the seedlings. They've already germinated. They're in the kitchen windowsill at the moment. And I'm going to be growing the Rotunda Biancas, and I'm going to be growing the Listada de Gandia. Now, the Listada de Gandia is one that I grew last year. I had 1 fruit out of 3 plants. And it actually had a beastie in it. The beastie got a really good meal out of that, but we didn't get to try it. So them's the breaks, as they say. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the information about the peppers because I have talked about the peppers before. And those are all sitting on the windowsill as well because I started them a couple of weeks ago. Now we're going to talk about tomatoes. Now, the tomatoes that I plan on growing this year is mostly cherry tomatoes. Now, the slicing tomatoes are salad tomatoes that people talk about here. I'm going to be growing again. I'm going to be growing the Marglobe tomatoes. Those were a really tasty variety that we grew last year. And I mean, I've got to grow Arkansas Traveler tomato seeds. Those are an heirloom tomato, and because I'm from Arkansas, I think it's the law that I have to grow them. So I'm going to grow those again this year. But most of the tomatoes that I'm growing are going to be cherry tomatoes. Because I live in Scotland, the cherry tomatoes tend to grow faster, they fruit faster, and they ripen more quickly because they're smaller. One of my, well, I'm going to go from my least favorite to my very favorite. And when I say my least favorite, I will still eat them all day long, so don't get me wrong there. I like all of these, or I wouldn't be growing them. I have actually put some of the tomatoes that I grew last year back in the container, back in the box. I'm going to skip growing some of them from last year. But one of them is the Cherry Baby. Now, the Cherry Baby grows small cherry tomatoes, and they grow, there's tons of them on one stem, and put out a lot of tomatoes, and they're very tasty. So those are definitely going to be growing. I'm going to be growing those this year. Another one, oh gosh, these other 3 are like #1 for me. So how does that happen? One is the Sun Gold. That's a favorite of a lot of people's, and I know that some people say that they crack and they split. I didn't have that problem last year. They were absolutely yummy, yummy tomatoes, and we had loads of them, and we love them. And they were actually quite big for cherry tomatoes. They were beautiful tomatoes. Another one that was one of my #1s was the black cherry tomato. And that, again, that's a big favorite for most people that I know that grow it. I grew these last year and absolutely love them. They were very, very tasty. They're not black. I just found them more of a deep kind of purpley red, but they absolutely tasted amazing. So these are definitely going to be in the garden this year. And this one, Cherry Falls, this is a dwarf tomato. Not one that you'd maybe grow in a basket. It's a determinate tomato, so that means that it only gets so high and it doesn't grow anymore. Last year when my husband and I got COVID, these things kept us alive. We lost our appetite and we ate these, and this plant put on, it was the first one to start fruiting, and it was the last one to fruit before everything died off for the season. I was still picking these in November last year. This is my, this probably above and beyond the black cherry and the Sun Gold. I think this is my #1 of #1s, is the Cherry Falls. And if you can get a hold of it, definitely grow it because it's an amazing tomato. I'm going to be growing corn again this year, but I'm not going to be growing them in containers, and there's no reason for that other than I just want to see how they do in the ground. I'm also doing kind of a rotation-y thing in the big veg bed because I've grown beans there 2 years running, and I just want to give that patch a little bit of a break and grow something else. So I will be growing some sweet corn, but like I said, not in containers, so we won't really talk about that much. The leeks, you know I'm growing leeks, and I'm going to be growing them in a different kind of way this year, and I am going to be growing them in containers. I'm not going to talk too much about how I'm going to grow the leeks this year. They're muscle burrow leeks. I have some that are on the windowsill that are growing that I'll be potting on hopefully in the next couple of months. They'll be going outside. Planted a second set of them because I want 17 that will fit in this one particular container. I want 17 leeks, and most of them are in the first batch, and then I'm going to grow some spares in the second batch. Carrots. I will be growing lots of carrots this year. We love carrots. I'm going to be growing the Resistifly F1s, which are hybrids. I'm going to be growing the deep purples, I think. I might change my mind there. I wasn't really that keen on those last year. I don't know why. They just didn't have the kind of flavor that I wanted from a carrot. So I may give those a miss, but right now they're still on the table. And the other one that I'm going to grow, and this is a new one for me, is the rainbow mix. Now this will have lots of different colors. I think there's yellow and purple and orange, and maybe that's all. I'll have to look at that again. But I did make some seed tape out of this rainbow mix, and I'll link that at the end of this video so you can look at that video. That's one of the carrots that I'll be growing, and those are in the seed tapes, and those are going to be the ones that I test in the containers. Now this year I'm also growing onions. We're growing just millions of onions because we have found so many different ways to use onions around in the kitchen. We use them in, chop them up, and we put them in steamed potatoes. We put them in all kinds of casseroles and stir fries and pasta dishes and everything. So I'm going to be growing as many spring onions as I can find containers, even if that means I've got to find like just an old bowl somewhere and put holes in it. I'll be growing onions in it. So I'm going to be growing the red mate, the North Holland Blood Red mate spring onions again, and I'm also growing some white Lisbon. Now you saw me planting the white Lisbon Winter Hardy outside. I am also getting I've also planted some Ailsa Craig and some red impastas. Those are also on the windowsill, and they are doing really well. Well, the red ones are doing really well. The Ailsa Craig, they're not very happy, so we'll just have to wait and see how they fare. But I have a backup because at the end of this month I have some onion sets that are on their way. One of them is called Cupido, that's like a yellow onion, and the other one is Red Baron. Those are going to be going some in containers and some in the ground, just to kind of see how they fare. And the ones that are going in the ground are going where the corn is going to be growing. So I'll have the corn in the back and the onions in the front, and so we'll see how that works. So that's the seeds for this year. So now it's time for the big question. What is your favorite seed to grow every year? And if you're just getting started this year or last year, what is the thing that you're looking forward to trying the most? Please tell me down in the comments because I really, really want to know. So there you have it. That's what I'll be growing in this year's garden. I'm looking forward to trying some new things, and I'm looking forward to growing some things that really performed well last year. And remember, you don't have to grow all the things, just grow something. Take care. Bye, y'all.